Ion was 22 years old, but his life felt like a heavy shadow. Every morning, he woke up with the same alarm, the same routine, and the same silence inside his heart. The world outside was busy, cars rushed on the road, people moved with purpose, and voices filled the air with laughter and plans. But Ion felt none of it. For him, life was only about surviving one more day. He walked to his job every morning. It was a small office, with grey walls and tired faces. People typed on their computers, talked about deadlines, and looked at their watches, waiting for the day to end. Ion was just like them, lost in the crowd, doing what everyone else was doing, without knowing why he was doing it. When his colleagues talked about their dreams, their voices carried energy. One said he wanted to start his own business. Another spoke about becoming a writer. Someone else talked about traveling the world. Their eyes shone with excitement, their faces lit with passion. But when it was Ion's turn, he had nothing to say. He simply smiled, hiding the emptiness inside. At night, when he returned home, his small room welcomed him with silence. There was no poster on the wall, no book on the table, no sign of passion. Only a bed, a chair, and an old fan spinning slowly. Sometimes he would lie down and stare at the ceiling, wondering if his life was meant to stay like this forever. His parents often asked him the same question. Ion, what do you want to do in life? But he never had an answer. He would change the subject or say, I don't know yet. Deep inside, he hated this answer, but it was the truth. He was like a traveler who had no map, no destination, and no road to follow. One evening, after another long day at work, Ion stood near his window. The city lights were shining, and he could see groups of friends laughing on the streets. A small boy passed by, holding a kite in his hand, running with excitement. For a moment, Ion felt something strange. He asked himself, when was the last time I felt this kind of happiness? When was the last time I ran after something I loved? But the answer never came. Instead, a heavy silence filled his chest. Ion's life had become like a book with empty pages. He was alive, but not really living. His heart beat every second, but it did not carry the rhythm of passion. He wanted to feel alive, but he did not know where to begin. Every morning, when he looked into the mirror, he saw a tired face staring back at him. Who am I? He whispered once. The reflection did not reply. It only looked back, with the same lost expression. The world outside was full of colors, but his world was painted in gray. His days were all the same, like copies of each other. Wake up. Work. Eat. Sleep. Repeat. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered, maybe there is more. Maybe life is not just about surviving. But the voice was weak, covered by fear and doubt. That night, Ion sat in his dark room, thinking about his life. He remembered how, as a child, he once dreamed of becoming something big, though he could not remember exactly what. He remembered drawing pictures, writing small notes, and laughing with joy. But those memories were like broken pieces, scattered in the corners of his mind. He asked himself again, was I born only to pass days like this? Was I born without a dream? The silence in the room answered him, and it was louder than any noise. Outside, the city was alive. People were moving, chasing goals, and creating stories. But inside Ion's small room, time felt frozen. His journey had no beginning, no middle, no end. He was simply standing still, surviving without a dream. But what he did not know was this: sometimes, life changes in the most unexpected way. Sometimes, one moment, one person, or one word can light a spark inside a heart that has been empty for years. Ion's story had not started yet. This was only the silence before the storm. Ion's life continued in the same circle, but inside his heart, the silence was getting heavier. He was surrounded by people every day, yet he felt completely alone. In the office, he sat with his colleagues, but their voices were like distant echoes. They talked about promotions, new skills, and bright futures. But Ion had nothing to share. During lunch breaks, the group would sit together. One colleague often said, I am preparing for a new course. It will help me get a better job. Another smiled and added, I want to save money to travel next year. Their dreams gave them energy. Even their struggles seemed lighter because they had a direction. When it was Ion's turn, Everyone looked at him with curiosity. "And you, Ion? What are you planning for your future?" He forced a smile, picked at his food, and said, "I don't know yet." The room went silent for a moment. Then the conversation moved on, but the weight of that one question remained with him. Inside, he felt a sharp pain. He wanted to scream, "I don't know. I don't have a dream like you all do. Stop asking me." But his lips stayed sealed. At home, the silence was louder. His parents, who loved him deeply, also worried about him. One evening, his father asked gently, "Son, what do you want from life? What makes you happy?" Ion looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly. He whispered, "I don't know." His father sighed, and his mother exchanged a sad glance with him. They did not push further, but Ion could see the concern in their eyes. That hurt him even more. Late at night, when the city was asleep, Ion lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning endlessly. He thought about his friends from school. Many of them were moving forward. Some had careers, some had families, some were chasing big dreams. But he was stuck. He remembered one of his childhood friends who used to say, "One day, I will become a doctor and save lives." That friend was now a respected doctor. Another had dreamed of becoming a singer, and though he wasn't famous, he was performing and living his passion. Ion whispered to himself, "And me? What am I doing? What am I living for?" The silence answered again. Sometimes he walked alone in the park, watching strangers. He saw children laughing, playing games, chasing kites. Their happiness felt pure, unshaken. Ion felt a small ache in his chest. "Why can't I feel this way anymore?" he thought. One day, while sitting on a park bench, he overheard two teenagers talking. "I want to be a pilot," one said. The other laughed, "And I want to be an engineer." Their voices were filled with energy and hope. Ion closed his eyes. Those words stabbed him softly, reminding him of what he had lost, the power to dream. At times, the pain became too much. He wanted to cry, but the tears never came. He carried the weight in silence, like a stone tied to his heart. He smiled in front of others, but inside, he was breaking slowly. One night, unable to sleep, he whispered into the darkness, "Maybe I was born without a dream. Maybe I am not meant to shine like others." The words echoed in his small room, and the loneliness wrapped around him tighter than ever. But deep inside, hidden under the layers of pain, a very faint voice still lived. It was almost invisible, almost silent, but it whispered, "Life cannot end like this. There has to be something more." Ion didn't notice that voice yet. For now, he only felt the weight of emptiness. But life had its own plans. The pain he carried in silence was preparing him for a moment he could not yet imagine, a meeting, a word, or a spark that would soon change everything. For now, the silent pain was his only companion. But every pain hides a lesson. And every silence hides a beginning. Ion's days passed in the same rhythm of silence and heaviness. Every morning he went to the office, every evening he came back to his lonely room, and every night he asked himself the same question, "What am I living for?" One Sunday evening, feeling restless, Ion decided to take a walk in the park near his home. The park was not very big, but it was filled with life. Children ran with kites, couples walked hand in hand, and old men sat on benches, talking about the past. Ion walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the ground. He did not want to meet anyone's gaze, because he felt like an outsider, someone who did not belong anywhere. After a few minutes, he sat down on an empty bench, away from the noise. He wanted to be alone with his thoughts. But destiny had a different plan. An old man was sitting at the other end of the bench. His hair was white, his clothes simple, and his face carried lines of age. But there was something unusual in his eyes. They were calm yet full of life, as if he carried stories no one else could see. The old man looked at Ion and smiled gently. "You look tired, son," he said in a soft voice. Ion was surprised. No stranger had ever spoken to him like that. He hesitated for a moment before replying, "I guess I am tired." The old man nodded slowly, as if he understood everything without needing an explanation. Tiredness does not always come from the body. Sometimes, it comes from the heart. You seem like a man whose heart has forgotten how to dream. Ion froze. His chest tightened. The words felt like arrows hitting the deepest part of him. How does this old man know? He thought. He wanted to ignore the conversation, but his lips opened on their own. Maybe I don't have a dream, he whispered. The old man looked at the children playing nearby. A kite flew high in the sky, its tail dancing with the wind. Look at that, he said, pointing toward the kite. The kite only flies because someone holds its string. Without that string, it would fall. Life is the same, my boy. Without a dream, you may still move, but you will never fly. Ion followed his gaze. The children were laughing, shouting with joy, running after the kite. Something stirred inside him. For a second, he felt like that small boy again, the one who once laughed without fear. But the moment disappeared quickly, replaced by the heavy emptiness. He turned to the old man. But what if I don't know what my dream is? What if I was born without one? The old man smiled mysteriously, his eyes shining under the park lights. No one is born without a dream. Sometimes it gets buried under fear, under doubt, under the noise of the world. But it is always there. You only need to search for it. Ion listened quietly. The old man's words felt different from anything he had ever heard before. They were simple, but they touched his soul like a forgotten melody. The old man continued, I was once like you, lost, empty, walking through life with no purpose. But one day, a small spark woke me up. That spark became my dream, and it gave meaning to my life. You too will find your spark. But first, you must open your heart to listen. For a moment, Ion did not know what to say. He wanted to ask more questions. What was the old man's dream? How did he find it? And how could Ion find his own? But before he could speak, the old man stood up. It's getting late, the man said. Remember this, son, life without a dream is like a book with blank pages. Fill your book before it's too late. He smiled one last time and walked away slowly, disappearing into the crowd of the park. Ion sat frozen on the bench, his mind spinning. Who was that man? Why did his words feel so powerful? And why did Ion's heart suddenly feel a spark of something he could not describe? For the first time in years, his chest carried not only pain, but also a question filled with hope. Could I really find a dream? Could I really change my life? That night, as Ion lay in his room, he could not sleep. The old man's words kept echoing in his head. Without a dream, you will never fly. Something had shifted inside him. The silence was still there, but now it carried a strange energy. It was as if a locked door had been slightly opened, showing a light on the other side. Ion did not know it yet, but this strange encounter was the beginning of his journey. The journey to find his dream. That night, after meeting the old man in the park, Ion could not sleep. He tossed and turned on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The man's words kept echoing in his ears. Without a dream, you will never fly. Fill your book before it's too late. He repeated them again and again until his chest started to ache. Something inside him was moving, like a locked door slowly opening after years of silence. For the first time in years, Ion felt curious. Could I really have a dream? Could it be hidden somewhere deep inside me? The next morning, Ion went to work as usual, but his heart was not the same. His colleagues talked about their projects, deadlines, and future plans, but Ion was lost in thought. Every now and then, he looked at their faces, the way their eyes lit up when they talked about something they loved. For the first time, instead of feeling jealous, he felt inspired. At lunch break, when someone asked him, "So Ion, still no plan for the future?" He didn't feel broken like before. Instead, he smiled softly and replied, "Maybe soon I'll find one." The words surprised even him. For once, he did not sound hopeless. He sounded like a man waiting for something. That evening, after dinner, Ion opened an old wooden box kept in the corner of his room. It was filled with small things from his childhood, school notebooks, drawings, letters, and little toys. He had not touched that box in years. His hands shook slightly as he pulled it toward him. At the bottom of the box, under old papers, he found a small diary. Its cover was torn, and the pages had turned yellow with time. He opened it carefully. On the very first page, in his own messy handwriting, were the words, "One day, I want to tell stories that people will never forget." Ion froze. His heart skipped a beat. He kept reading, and on the next page, he saw small sketches, short notes of characters, and half-written stories. Each word carried the voice of his younger self, the boy who once dreamed without fear. Tears filled Ion's eyes. He had forgotten all about this. As a child, he had loved writing stories. He used to sit near the window with a pencil, imagining heroes, journeys, and adventures. But life, with its weight of responsibilities and fear, had buried that dream so deep that he had almost killed it. Now, holding the diary in his hands, he felt a spark, a tiny flame of excitement mixed with pain. Could this be my dream? He asked himself. Could writing be the thing I was born to do? He stayed awake for hours, reading every page, remembering the little boy who believed he could create worlds with words. Somewhere deep inside, he could hear that boy whispering, "Don't forget me. Don't forget us." The next day, when Ion returned from work, he didn't fall onto his bed like usual. Instead, he took a notebook and a pen. He sat at his desk, staring at the blank page. His hands trembled, his mind was filled with doubt. What if I'm not good enough? He thought. What if people laugh at me? But then, the old man's voice echoed in his head again. Without a dream, you will never fly. With a deep breath, Ion pressed his pen to the paper. Slowly, the words began to flow. At first, they were clumsy and uncertain. But soon, they began to take shape. He wrote about a lonely boy who found hope in an unexpected place. He wrote about pain, silence, and sparks of change. When he finished the first page, he stared at it for a long time. It was not perfect, but it was real. For the first time in years, he felt alive. That night, before sleeping, Ion whispered to himself, "Maybe this is it. Maybe this is my dream." It was only a small beginning, just a single page of writing, but it felt like a mountain had moved inside him. He realized something powerful: dreams don't come fully grown. They begin as small sparks. And if you protect that spark, if you feed it, it can grow into a fire that lights your entire life. Ion's heart was still heavy, and his fears had not disappeared. But for the first time, his silence carried hope instead of emptiness. He felt like he was standing at the door of something new. The journey would not be easy. He knew there would be doubts, struggles, and failures waiting ahead. But he also knew that he had found something worth fighting for. The spark had been lit. And once a spark is born, it can set the whole heart on fire. The first spark inside Ion's heart had been lit. He had opened his childhood diary, remembered his forgotten passion for writing, and filled a new page with words. It was only a beginning, but for him, it felt like a rebirth. Yet, finding a dream was only the start. The real journey began when he decided to follow it. Every evening after work, Ion sat at his desk with a notebook and pen. At first, it was exciting. His imagination felt alive again. But soon, the excitement turned into struggle. The words did not always come. Sometimes he stared at the blank page for hours. Sometimes he wrote a few lines, only to tear them up in frustration. Doubt whispered to him constantly. What if I'm not good enough? What if nobody cares about my stories? What if I'm just wasting my time? But then, he remembered the old man's voice, "Without a dream, you will never fly." Those words became his anchor. Whenever he felt like giving up, he repeated them to himself, like a prayer. One evening, Ion finally gathered the courage to share his writing. He gave a short story to one of his close colleagues at work. "Could you read this?" he asked nervously. The colleague glanced at the paper and chuckled. "Ion, since when did you become a writer?" He laughed and added, "I'll read it later if I have time." The paper was left on the desk, ignored. Ion's heart sank. His face burned with embarrassment. For a moment, he felt like throwing all his notebooks into the trash. That night, lying on his bed, he stared at the ceiling again. The silence of his room felt heavier than ever. But this time, something was different. He whispered to himself, "Even if they don't believe in me, I have to believe in myself." The next day, instead of hiding his notebook, he carried it proudly. At lunch, when someone mocked him again, "Writer Sahib, when is your big novel coming out?" He smiled instead of breaking. "Maybe sooner than you think," he replied calmly. Slowly, small victories began to appear. Ion started writing every single day, even when he was tired from work. At first, he could write only a few sentences. Then, he managed a full page. Later, he completed his first short story. When he finally finished that story, he held the paper in his hands and smiled. It was not perfect. The grammar was messy, the sentences were uneven. But it was his. It was proof that he could create something out of nothing. Encouraged, Ion decided to share his story online, anonymously. He posted it on a small website for writers. His hands trembled as he pressed the button. Hours later, when he checked, there were 2 comments. One said, "Nice attempt. Keep going." The other said, "I felt the pain of the character. Well done." Tears filled Ion's eyes. They were just 2 small comments from strangers, but they felt like gold. For the first time, someone had read his words and felt something. That night, he whispered to himself, "This is what I want. I want people to feel through my stories." But the struggles did not stop. His parents were still worried. "Why are you wasting time with this writing? Focus on your job," his father said one evening. His mother added, "Dreams don't feed you, Ion. Be practical." Ion respected them, but his heart could not ignore the fire that had started burning. He nodded quietly, but inside, he promised himself, "I will prove them wrong, not with arguments, but with results." The days turned into weeks. The weeks into months. Ion faced rejection, doubt, and loneliness. Many nights, he cried silently, asking himself if he was strong enough to continue. But every time, he remembered the little boy he once was, the boy who wrote in his diary, "One day, I want to tell stories that people will never forget." That memory gave him strength. And so, despite the pain, he kept moving. One small story. One small comment. One small step forward. Each little victory became a light guiding him through the darkness. For the first time in his life, Ion was no longer just surviving. He was fighting, he was creating, he was chasing something. The struggles were real, but so were the small wins. And sometimes, small wins are enough to keep the fire alive. Ion didn't know it yet, but these small steps were shaping him for something much bigger. His dream was no longer just a spark, it was slowly turning into a flame. Months passed, and Ion's life had changed. It was not easy, he still had his job, his family still worried, and doubt still knocked at his door every night. But there was one big difference, he was no longer empty. Every day, after finishing his office work, he returned to his small room and picked up his pen. The same room that once felt silent and lifeless was now filled with pages, notebooks, and the sound of scribbling. The walls that once carried only shadows now carried words, his words. He faced failure many times. Some stories received no response online. Some people criticized his writing. Sometimes he read his own work and thought, "This is terrible. Maybe I am fooling myself." But each time, he refused to quit. He remembered the old man's words, "Without a dream, you will never fly." And slowly, step by step, Ion began to fly. One day, something unexpected happened. A popular online platform for young writers announced a competition. Writers had to submit a short story, and the best ones would be published in a magazine. Ion hesitated. Fear whispered in his ear, "You're not ready. You'll lose. People will laugh." But hope whispered louder, "Try. Even if you fail, at least you will know you tried." With shaking hands, he submitted his story. 4 days, he couldn't sleep properly. He checked his email every hour. Each moment felt like forever. Then, one morning, while sipping tea at his desk, he saw the message. "Congratulations, Ion. Your story has been selected for publication." His heart raced. He read the email again and again, tears filling his eyes. His story, the words he once thought were meaningless, was going to be read by thousands of people. That evening, he showed the email to his parents. At first, they were silent, not fully understanding. But when the magazine finally arrived and they saw his name printed under the title of his story, their eyes softened. His mother held the magazine with trembling hands and whispered, "This is your name, our son's name." His father, usually strict, placed a hand on his shoulder and said, maybe this is your path after all." For Ion, it was more than recognition. It was proof that he had found his dream, and that dream was real. After that, he didn't stop. He wrote more stories, improved his skills, and built his courage. Each story carried a piece of his pain, his silence, and his hope. Readers began to notice. Comments turned into messages, and messages turned into letters of appreciation. People wrote, "Your story touched my heart." Another said, "I felt like you were telling my life." Each word from his readers became fuel for his soul. He realized something beautiful. Dreams are not only about personal success. Dreams are also about touching others, about giving hope to those who are lost, just like he once was. One evening, months later, Ion returned to the same park where he had met the old man. He sat on the same bench, watching the children run with kites. The memory of that strange encounter came rushing back. He wished he could meet the old man again, to thank him. But the old man was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps he was just a traveler, or perhaps life had sent him only for that one message. Ion looked up at the sky where the kites danced in the wind. He smiled and whispered, "You were right. Without a dream, we cannot fly. Thank you for giving me wings." For the first time in years, Ion's heart was not empty. It was full of stories, full of hope, full of dreams. He had found the meaning of his life. And he knew one thing with certainty, this was only the beginning. His dream had found him. And now, he was ready to fly.